maybe a month ago we reconnected, just not reconnected, but
Yeah.
just kind of like started chatting again
Yeah.
and connecting more. And we have known each other and worked together in different capacities for, we were just saying almost a decade, which is like,
Which makes us old.
I did a podcast a while ago with my girlfriend and we were calling each other vintage. I feel like I like that better.
It is. Yes.
Yes, I feel like I like that better than
Seasoned. Very, very seasoned.
seasoned.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, seasoned, vintage,
Righteous.
righteous. What's another word we were looking at that meant like in the vault kind of thing? But I was like, oh man, that's so cool. So, any hoops, we've known each other forever. We have both worked in multiple different facets of social work, and so I think the cool thing that's brought us together, and why we have decided to do a podcast is to speak to your journey of unconventional social work, because mine has been.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, because mine has been interesting too, right? Like I have the therapy business, I have the therapeutic flair, I've done a lot of different things, but this coaching side, this business side is like this entrepreneurial, can't say the word, entrepreneurial spirit that we both have to, like, we were just saying, find a need, fix it, create it, something that we feel like we need that's not there. Like we go and we create it because that's what we do. We're doers, right? We're creators. And so I think that's really been awesome to see you grow in the different aspects of social work that you've done. So with all that said, why don't you speak to, since I'm going to be pitching this during Social Work Month, yay, speak to just what you're up to these days in your role professionally and kind of how you've landed there.
Yeah. So currently I manage, I'm in operations and I manage 12 outpatient OBGYN practices.
Crazy.
Yeah. So when I say operations pretty much is the Jill of all trades. You're in everything. I'm in clinical operations. So I'm essentially responsible for making sure that all of the practices are running smoothly and that patients' needs are met. I do have people that report to me, so I'm not in the weeds, but I'm that 10,000 foot view person, making sure that we're all on the same ship. And we don't have people jumping off on their own little life preserve boats and going in different directions. Coincidentally, when I got the position, whenever I apply for jobs, obviously I wear the social work flag loud and proud. I do not right now practice social work clinically. But that was in talking to my hiring manager and the people that I interviewed with, they really, really liked that I'm a social worker by trade.
Yeah.
Because when you're in this business side and operations, what's it about? It's about collaboration, interprofessional, connecting with others, knowing when to pause, knowing when to move forward. And I leverage those social work skills.
Yeah.
Every single day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So
now you currently have your LMSW, correct?
Yes.
Yep. So that's for those of you that aren't in this world of ours, that's a licensed master social worker. And so it's at least a handful of years of college, including graduate school, and multiple years of doing, I don't want to necessarily say clinical work, but quasi clinical work where you're in and out of like different facets of social work, learning different trades. So whether it be therapy or emergency department, like we have done, or just different grant work, right? Like in the community,
community work. I strategically chose not to get the LCSW. I appreciate and understand mental health.
Yeah.
But I needed a broader portfolio of opportunities.
Yeah.
Now with that said, if anyone does get their LCSW and you go into private practice, you can have a really good business and be financially successful.
Yeah, and there's different elements, right, to the LC. You do have to have a few thousand hours of clinical work, and that is, you can only get that in certain aspects, which is not what you wanted to pursue.
Yeah, I didn't want to do that. This is not a insult to anyone with their LCSW, but
Yeah.
I get bored just listening over and over
Yeah.
again to other
Yeah.
people's problems.
Yeah.
So the LMSW just really was just a better
fit.
for
Yeah,
me.
and it allows you to still do a lot of different things, So what's cool is that you're more of this like meso macro type social work, right? So just for those again that aren't familiar with this lingo, you have micro social work, which is a lot of individual family therapy or one-on-one case management. Yeah, things that are like one-on-one
clients.
Yes. And then you've got this like meso, which is kind of in between where it's like group work, sort of like supervision management work. And then the macro level is like political or higher level organization stuff, which is what you're doing.
Organizational behavior is change management.
Yeah. Which is really cool because I'm kind of the opposite. Like I love doing things that are going to affect that, global scale of change, but I'm not up at the top, like organizing that, which is cool because that's where you're at, which is neat.
Yeah. And it didn't happen overnight. Oh my gosh, I so value the experience that I had in the emergency department.
Yeah.
I mean, that is very micro.
Yeah.
But when when you work as a social worker in a hospital, you have to understand the bigger picture, the health insurance, the hierarchy of the culture. It is micro, but in a very large macro system. So when I did that for a while, and I've worked in all sorts of different clinical settings, including mental health. I did do mental health for a little bit.
And you've done community work, and then you've done grants to help out in different areas too.
Yeah. So what ended up happening is I needed to go to work full time because of some personal things in my life, and
you have kids and you're married.
And my husband's self-employed, so we had to switch gears. And I just knew I couldn't work full time in the emergency department because of the emotional. It's just heavy stuff.
High burnout.
Yeah. So it was just coincidental that the hospital had a grant, a CMS grant initiative, and they said, "Hey, do you want to take the lead on this and operationalize it?" And I just took it and ran with it. And then I guess I'm still running with all sorts of
Yeah, and that's kind of where we met, right? Like that was where we got a little bit closer, I think, and talked a little bit more because I was doing some grant work through the emergency.
That's right, the community health.
ED care triage.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so we knew each other from the emergency department, but our relationship grew sort of at this level of doing similar, we kind of ran into each other.
Because
I think
with many of these grant programs,
they cross over.
And patients are inundated. And the patient doesn't know this,
right?
But behind the scenes, they're in about 5 different programs.
Yes.
And then I remember I would call you and I'd say, "Are you following this patient, or am I following this patient, or can we both take the patient on? But I'll take the back seat, you take the driver's seat." Yeah.
So there was a lot of that crossover, and I think we realized too in that whole process, like what a cluster some of these systems were, right? So we were like, how can we make this better? And that's where I think my drive on the individual level and where my drive comes from in teaching social workers, right? To look at the big picture. We were talking about this earlier, and where that drive for you on the hierarchy, like the bird's eye view comes for the organization top down, and for you to teach. So not only are you doing this or what is the title that you have now?
I'm a director of operations.
Director of operations. Okay. But with that social work flair, which is so cool. So you're running all of these meetings and trying to really organize
I'm always looking for improvement
Yeah.
opportunities and operations, and then there's the people management.
Yes.
And I coach a lot of that's where, when I supervise staff, I approach it from a coaching
Yeah. I
perspective.
think that's where we align so much in
Yeah.
this stuff. So yeah, so you're helping that growth, which is beautiful. And then you're teaching too on the side at a
on
local
the side,
college.
yeah, I just started teaching at Nazareth adjunct. And I've always gravitated towards social work students. Because when I worked at the hospital, myself and another coworker, we led the social work internship program.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I see it as I get something out of it, and I see it as part of my professional duty to make sure that the social workers that we're grooming and training, that they represent, that they too are stewards of the profession and go out professionally and
Yeah.
do good
Oh,
work.
I love that.
So
I forgot that you did that too in the intern.
oh my
stuff.
God, I loved it.
Yeah. And that's what drives you to do this teaching too.
And then even too, at some point, I had teamed up with the chief of residence in the emergency department, and I said, hey, I would really love to work more closely with the residents and the medical students, because a lot of them come in and they don't know what social work does.
Right.
Well, you and I both know that they're going to find out very quickly what social work does.
And we do a million different things, right? Yeah.
And some of them come in with wrong and like just negative attitude.
Yeah.
And I may sound like a jerk, but I actually enjoy teaching them and flapping that attitude right out.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Like, no, that's not what we do.
How we
Yeah.
practice healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so once a month I would go and do a 1 hour, like a lecture to the medical students about the role of social work.
Yeah.
And when to call us and what to do. So yeah, there's been this theme through the whole time in my life, my career.
Yeah.
On teaching and
growth.
Yeah.
Where did you start out of grad school? What was that first? Do you recall your
my first job?
Yeah, right out of grad school.
Yeah, so you want to know something funny? So well, first of all, I got into social work. I'm gonna age myself here. I had moved back from the West Coast. I originally wanted to work with refugees.
Oh. Wow, that's huge around here too.
Yeah,
in our area.
And so this is when they used to post jobs in the newspaper. And I sat down in the newspaper. I'm like, oh, that looks like a neat job. And then it would say for the requirements, and it said LMSW, MSW, LMSW. And I literally was like, what is this LMSW stuff? Because my undergraduate is not in social work. So next thing I knew, I was went back to grad school, got the master's in social work. I called it the 4-year forever plan because I got married and had my first child while in grad school.
Oh my gosh. I didn't know that part.
Oh yeah.
Crazy.
And then, I had a C-section, and then they're very strict about the classes you can miss. And they're like, well, you can just miss one class. I'm like,
you're like, okay.
But anyhow, got done with grad school, and I just had this itch. I don't know how else to describe it. I was very curious about emergency medicine. I don't know if it was just.
Well, you had just had a C-section.
I know, right? I just had this itch. Well, then coincidentally, my mom is a LPN.
Okay, I didn't know that part. She
always wanted me to go into nursing because my mom's from a small town and women only did like 5 things as a career. I started out in nursing in undergrad. No, not for me.
No, I can't touch people. It's not my gig. I can talk to you all day long.
Yeah,
I just can't. Right? Like I would tell our nurses when we used to work in the ED, I would be like, thank God for you to touch these people and like be all up in their like I will
in their space,
right? And they're like, well, I don't. They're like, we get to go in and walk out. I don't want to talk to them. And I'm like, well, thank God that we have,
We can compliment each other.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's always,
Yeah.
I always love the medical team when we're like, you got your gig, I got
Yeah,
mine.
you do you, and
Yeah.
I'll do me.
Good
Yeah,
special
so
person.
anyways, I got done, and one of my social work students, or not student, co-student that graduated a year ahead of me, just happened to be the senior social worker in the emergency department.
Okay.
And I called her and I said, hi, I'm kind of interested in, like, what do you do? Can we go have coffee? I really want to know what a social worker does in the emergency department. And then she said, Lisa, will you just please send me your resume?
She's
And
like, I don't care. I'm
yeah,
not telling you, you're just gonna come do
right.
it.
And I sent it in,
Yeah.
didn't even formally apply.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I know, I was interviewing.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, during my interview, I was I I don't even know what the question was, but I said, no, I think they actually asked, how are you going to be able to handle
Mm.
working in the emergency setting? And I looked at them and I said, I have no idea. I may pass out at the first sight of blood. I have no idea what I'm doing right now. And they
You're,
hired me anyway.
you're like, I mean, they're like, you've had kids, you're good. Like, just come on in.
But at the same time, if anyone had answered differently, I mean, that was the truth.
Yeah.
That was,
Yeah. No, I remember that same question in the interview. And
yeah.
similarly, this happened to me. I was actually working for Child Protective at the time and had my, I think at the time I'd had my first son. Yep. And I was kind of just looking for like an extra, I had always had a couple jobs, right? That's what we do in social work. We were talking about that,
Yeah,
right?
your
Like
side hustle.
we like having like our hands in different pots to
Yeah.
keep us on our toes, right? That's just kind of the gig. And so I was kind of like, something to maybe supplement, but also to get me out of like this grind in Child Protective, right? Like something different, still upbeat, still fast paced, because I needed that, but
Yeah.
something a little different. And my coworker, who so funny, I'm not going to name her name, but we still are good friends now. But we worked on the same team. We both worked at Strong in multiple different ways in the hospital together, and we've both done different things together, and we still remain friends. She's an amazing human being, but she's like, you would be really good. I'm doing this per diem here and there. Just give me your resume. I'll give it to this person. And I'm like, all right, next thing you know,
Same.
I get a call. They're like,
Yeah.
we don't really care. Just come work for us. Like, you'll be great. How do you do with blood and gore? I'm like, I mean, I'm a mom. I've,
Right.
seen some things,
Yeah.
right? But death and dying is something I'd never really
Mhm,
experienced to the
mhm,
capacity. So
mhm.
that was an interesting, humbling, right? The things we've seen.
Yeah, some people ask, how do you do it? Or was that the worst part of it? Of course it's sad,
Yeah.
but how do I put this? It's gonna sound weird. That was one of my favorite parts of the job.
Yeah, because you're using your skills, right?
Well, that, and I'm part of such a pure
Mhm.
primal moment.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that just brought more depth to my own life.
Yes. Yes.
That
Yeah.
may be a selfish way of looking at it, but
Yeah.
I appreciated and respected the moments at the bedside
That were hard.
with family members.
Mhm.
And there's noises you never forget,
Yeah.
and there's moments you never forget, and
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We learn how to compartmentalize, I think, something which is, you just hit it on the head, primal, right? Which I think
Mhm.
we all do in some sort of capacity. But I think that secondary trauma that hits us, we
Oh yeah, I had a
learn.
moment, I can tell you.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't, obviously death with a child is much
Yes.
more severe
Yes.
versus, and I don't mean to minimize the death of an aging person,
Hmm.
but you see it all. And I just had a standard, I shouldn't say just, but I had a standard nursing home patient came in. This, everyone knew that after we looked at the paperwork, this was a, DNR,
Hmm.
called family.
Right.
We're saying goodbye.
Hmm.
Again, it's an older person that you would expect to move on to wherever the next place is. And I remember I went back to the social work office and I just started
Yeah,
crying.
just hit you.
And I'm sitting and the other coworkers were there and I'm like, why am I crying? Because
Mm-hmm.
how many of these moments have I stood behind, next to families with their
Mm-hmm.
grandparents and it occurred to me, I wasn't crying about that one. I was crying about all the other
Yeah, the compound.
the tough cases that
Yeah.
I had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so interesting too. I'll share as well, kind of I remember having a very young child pass away, and it was pretty brutal. I mean, wasn't anything anybody did. It was kind of just, unfortunately, sort of like a natural cause
Hmm.
situation. But the family had left at that point, which is like also brutal
Oh,
to have to leave your
to
child,
tell the
right?
family, okay, you're leaving
Yes.
without your child.
Yes,
Yeah.
awful,
Yeah.
right? And then to look around, and I remember being in the room looking at the doctor, the couple nurses, and there was somebody else in there too. I'm not sure who that was, maybe a tech, but there was like 4 or 5 of us in the room, and they were all crying. Like it was pretty rough.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I was not yet, and I was able to support them and help them through it. And the same thing, I get back to the social work office and had a moment, and I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
it was like you're releasing that all for
Right.
everybody.
You're like crying for every single
Yes.
person you've ever
Yes.
been
It
next to
was a
or
wild
yeah.
experience, and it was beautiful, also
Hmm.
tragic, but one of those things that it's like you'll hold that forever,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
which is something really amazing in this profession.
Hmm.
But as we're sitting here talking about it, right? Like everything in our body is like triggered, like you could even break down now. So it's one of those things that you're like, how do I survive multiple episodes of this, right? So we do
Hmm.
it for so long, when you start to realize maybe this isn't something I want to do forever and always.
Well, and what was happening, and we were talking about where the journey went, the professional
Yeah.
journey. It just so happened I had to go to work full time, and there really wasn't a full-time position open in the ED, but to leave that
Mhm.
environment and then jump into running grants, I was just like I don't even know what I'm doing. Um, but looking back, it was a really good decision for myself personally.
Yeah.
Because at the time too, I had young kids
Yes.
and I had to constantly make a conscious effort
Mm.
not to, I had to compartmentalize.
Yeah.
If something happened where they were physically like, I don't know, not that they were in danger, but just something benign, like maybe they ran across the street
Hmm.
without looking both ways, I would have to restrain and be like, nope, Lisa, they are not, this is not your patient in the emergency room. Because I would know the 20,000 things that
Yep.
could happen.
Yep. We see too much.
We see too much. So I didn't realize that I was living that way
Hmm.
until I left.
Yeah.
And I guess became normal.
Well, it's funny, my husband said this when I left CPS, because there was something
Oh
very
gosh. Yeah.
difficult there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So when I left CPS, which I loved that work, don't get
Yeah.
me wrong, it is remarkable, commendable work. And there's a part of me that wishes I was still a part of that system, but it is hard.
Oh, yeah, I
It is
applaud
hard.
you. There's no way
Yeah,
I would
it was
work in
hard.
CPS.
And
Mm-mm.
then when you have your own kids, right?
Oh
My
yeah.
mindset changed so much after
Yeah.
coming back after having a baby.
Yeah.
But I digress. So I remember leaving there to go to the emergency department, where it's like you don't have a caseload anymore, right? Like
Yeah.
you go in, you handle the situation, you
And
go
move
home,
on.
you move it
Yes.
on to somebody else,
Yes.
right? Because we're a 24-hour
Yeah.
service. So my husband was like, it took me probably 3 to 6 months to like
To
decompress,
yes.
but he was
Yes.
like, you are a remarkably different human. Like
Yes.
I didn't
My
even know
husband said
it,
the same thing to
right?
me. Yeah.
And then when I, took that senior position and was like a little bit removed, doing things from more of a
Yeah.
supervising
Yeah. Yeah.
standpoint, he's like, again, you are a different human, right? Like, and now doing this, he's like, you're just a different human. Like, it's
Yeah.
like you're not, having to, yes, I still compartmentalize. Yes, I still have moments. Actually, a couple weeks ago, I had a client, grown man, crying on my couch, of just like going through some really hard things. And he looked at me and he goes, what do you do when your clients start crying on your couch? And I go, sometimes I cry with them. And we just were like both a little like
Yeah.
teary-eyed, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, it just happens. Like, so there are days that are really hard. There are days where I
Yeah.
have 7 straight clients that have been crying leaving my office, right? And yes, I have to compartmentalize, but it's different. It's different than seeing death and dying, than seeing,
Well, when
you
you're in
know,
that emergency setting, a lot of it is acute,
yes, so
you
acute,
know,
yes.
so then that adds a whole other level of
Yeah, fast paced.
tragedy to it.
Yeah. So it's different, right? Like we learn how to compartmentalize quickly. We learn our limits quickly, and we learn coping skills quickly. And then when we move out of that into something new, it's a shock to the system a little
Oh,
bit.
yeah.
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 But then you took that role, which you've done community work, you've done ED work, you've done higher level grant work.
Yeah. So when I was doing the grant work, oh my God, that went gangbusters. I was like, oh my God, I'm good at this.
You found a new
I did find a
trade.
new thing. And at one point, my supervisor came to me and they gave me another grant to manage. So I was managing both. And I remember I got a lot of coaching from her, because when you get into more of the operations and management, you know this, it becomes understanding the politics, understanding how to go to meetings, and sometimes you observe.
Yep.
I remember I would go with her to meetings, and there would be some top leaders at these
Yeah.
meetings, and I would sit, and I knew enough not to open my mouth, but I would sit and listen. And what they were saying were things that I knew that my boss, like what these people at the table were saying, actually maybe was wrong, or I knew that my boss had information that would be beneficial to this group. And it drove me crazy because she wouldn't say anything. And so one day I asked her, I said, why didn't you say anything? And she said, well, part of it is you got to know when to let others sometimes need to go down that journey on their own.
Yeah.
You know, you got to let the work happen.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. So it's just the new work that I've evolved into. It still requires social work skills, but it's just a whole.
It's when to lead and when to follow, right?
Yes.
That's such a huge piece, I think, in learning about any role within social work, is like, if you're, I would say majority of the social workers I've encountered have really great leadership skills to some degree, right? But the remarkable high level social workers know when to lead and when to follow. And it's pretty cool to sit back and see some of that happen, you know, and I think that's what you're speaking to, is this like, yeah, you just got to let it ride sometimes.
You got to let it ride. Yeah.
Which is now what you're doing, right? Is you're helping people grow, but you're letting them figure it out.
Yeah. So, and I learned just as much from my staff, you know, because I don't know, I'm not in the weeds. I just had a meeting the other day with one of my staff, and we were looking at details in the medical, like the scheduling, and but I was like, well, teach me on this. So it is vice versa. But on the flip side, I'm teaching her, I hope I'm teaching her that when she goes to meetings, how to direct a meeting. There's a skill to that.
Yeah. We're not meeting just to meet. Like, there's a purpose, there's an intention. Yeah.
And when to pause and when to say something, and how to own things and be okay with that ownership.
Good or bad, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's the worst. I know. I've had some moments of having to, you know, it's interesting. That's a humbling experience, I have to say. And when we were working together at the hospital at that level, right? A lot of these meetings, there were times, and even in this past role that I had at a different hospital system, there were many times I could throw people under the bus, right? And I ended up taking the fall for things. And I look back and I'm like, man, there are so many things, right? Or there are moments that I didn't, and I learned from that, right? There are moments where I probably should have closed my mouth when I didn't, right? But we all learn and evolve. But yeah, there are so many times where I'm like, man, I could have, but I took it. I ended up taking the fall. I ended up being the bad guy, right? But it's an experience of.
Well, that's where you talk about strategy, strategic decisions, and
and it's like, it probably to some may have looked poor, right? But I think for me, it was a good experience to be able to learn more about me.
Well, and you need that job where you can make mistakes.
Mhm.
You need that playground.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a good point.
Yep.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
hard. We were talking at the beginning before we hopped on about that critical thinking, and that there's this sort of lack of that element in being taught to the incoming social workers about how to tap into that. So speak to that for a moment, if you could, just kind of how that portion of you has evolved, that
Oh,
critical thinking, and like what you would want to sort of help others.
yeah. So when I was in, I'm going to go way back.
Yeah.
I think these seeds kept getting dropped in my mind, and
Mhm.
you have to recognize the seeds over time, right?
Gotta listen, yeah.
Yeah. So when I was in grad school, a lot of the teaching is on relationships, and there is a little bit of macro,
Mhm. Mhm.
but what bothered me is there was no business discussion, and it bothered me that when you look at some of the larger nonprofit organizations, it's not the social worker that's running that organization, it's
Mhm.
someone with an MBA or
Yeah.
someone that hasn't really had experience frontline.
Yeah. Boots on the ground.
Right. And I'm not saying that you're not a bad leader, because the good leaders who don't have experience, a good leader would be someone that would go to the frontline staff and say, teach me, like,
Yeah.
let me know what you're doing so that I can best drive this organization to that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it just bothered me that we didn't learn that in school. But at the same time, I think people who go into social work gravitate towards the soft skills,
Yeah.
and they don't gravitate towards some of those harder, not harder, I mean like business and
Yeah.
money, and that's a whole different mindset.
Mhm.
So in talking about critical thinking, that was kind of always sitting with me, and at one point I did go on and get my MBA while I was in working at the hospital, and I was working. I had a very short stint working in CPAP,
I remember that.
and
And for those of you that don't know,
yeah,
that is a psychiatric emergency department is what which we've both actually worked in
yeah.
different facets, but yes.
So talking about those critical thinking skills, and I just, anyways, I don't want to get into details as to what was going on, but there was just this moment where I realized I can't work frontline right now.
Mm.
And I called my supervisor and I said, look, I was crying.
Mm.
I said, I know I've only been in this job for 2 weeks, but this other job opportunity has opened up for me. I was not expecting it. It's not in social work, it's more macro, it's more business side.
Mhm.
I can't just work the front line anymore right now because I need to be part of solving bigger issues.
Ah, yeah. You were seeing the trickle down. It's almost like you were in it in the trenches, and you could see how what was happening
Right. And I'm
at the
like, I
top was
can't,
not, there was a disconnect,
there was a
right?
disconnect. And I'm
Yeah.
like, and I said to her, I was laughing a little bit. I said, I'm going to be a royal pain in your butt if I continue in this position, because
Mhm.
I wasn't hired to, I was hired to do social work. I
Yeah.
wasn't hired in that particular job
To have a critical thinking.
to be at a table where I had any decision authority, or,
Yeah.
on a macro level.
Yeah. What an aha moment though.
Yeah.
And like think about that though, like you had the insight to recognize the triggers with it, like everything in your body was screaming at you,
Yeah. I
right?
can't,
But think about so many people that don't have the social work background, that don't have that understanding and deeper sense of self to recognize like this is not for me right now. I'm doing this population and my coworkers a disservice by being
yes,
here,
yes.
you
That is
know?
exactly what it is. And I'm doing the patient a
Right.
disservice
That's what I
if
mean.
I'm
Yep.
walking in every day grumbling and annoyed that,
Yeah.
that I can't.
Change it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
And
I
you
just
just,
said, I
yeah.
gotta tap out on this.
Yeah. And I don't think enough people have that ability, right? I don't think enough people have the ability and insight to stop and say, what is my intention here? What
Mhm,
is
mhm.
like all the bells and whistles are going off in our body screaming at us that we're not in the right spot, but we just grind it out because that's what we're taught to
Well, and I
do.
have to say I had the luxury at that time where this other job
Yes,
it was just all
correct.
timing. I mean, because
But you could have dismissed that,
oh yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Because there was a part of me like, oh my God, I feel so bad. I mean,
Hmm.
at this point I've been at strong for well, 10 years. I left for
Yeah.
a little bit. I mean, and people, it's a big place, but
Everybody knows
I did
everybody.
not want to have this reputation of like, oh,
Yeah.
it was really hard to call my boss and be like, I'm sorry, I've been here for 2 weeks, but I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if that would impact my career. And
Yeah.
her and I had a crucial conversation about it. And she's like, no, I,
Yeah.
she recognized the emotional intelligence
Yes.
that I was,
Huge.
yeah,
Huge. Yeah. But I think that's what we want to get to, right? So, in saying that, to recap all of that
yeah.
for you, that's what you want to instill in these new social workers coming in is understanding their limits, understanding their limiting beliefs in themselves,
Mhm,
where that
mhm.
line is, right? Because I think sometimes we fear doing something because we're holding ourselves back from a limiting belief. We have to recognize that it might be a limiting belief, or it's just, this is my limit. This is what I'm capable of because this is
Right.
what I choose to do, right? You were like, I know that I could do this work,
Mhm, mhm.
but this isn't, I'm not going to be able to give it my all. So
Right, right.
this is actually where my limit stops and I have to pursue this direction, which I think is such, again, emotional intelligence, right? It comes back to that, which that's such a huge game changer too. And where you landed now.
Yeah, so and you and I were talking about this, and this is kind of social, you can see the social work skills too. I like to solve problems.
Mhm.
So instead of again applying it on that micro level, I'm at just a bigger macro
Yeah.
level,
Yeah.
and I'd like to have a good problem, work on it, solve it, and then move on to the next one.
Yep. Amazing. What a journey.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see where this next journey
Yeah,
takes you
me
too,
too.
because we've talked about other things down the pipe of
I
energy,
know
but
of my crazy idea.
we all have crazy thoughts and crazy ideas. This is why I've landed where I've landed, because if I didn't, sometimes I was just creating content around this and podcasting around this idea of like quieting the brain so you can actually listen to yourself, because
Mhm.
we have so much infiltrating, right? Like penetrating our thoughts of, well, if I did this, this person would think this, or this person, what about my family? What about my parents? What about my kids? What about, right? Like, what about this friend or this coworker, right? We make so many decisions based on what other people say or think,
Mhm.
rather than really sitting with ourselves and listening, like quieting the brain, like letting the noise drop out so we can actually listen to ourselves. I think it's really hard to do that. And
Yeah,
it's
or that could
scary.
be, or to wrap this all up, that could be just because we're vintage. And and
We are vintage.
as you get older, you're like, yeah, I don't really care about what you all say.
That is true. That is true. I think the aging process does bring out this. I like, okay, so I just turned 39, not to throw this out there. And so I'm like, man, I got one more year before I hit this 40. But like, I'm excited because I hear the 40s are freaking amazing for letting go of like
Oh yeah, yeah,
this,
yeah.
like,
Yeah, I can,
like
yeah,
releasing the, what about this person saying this? And what, like, there's an element
yeah.
to the 40s of
Oh, I relate so much more to my teenage daughter because people say stuff, and in my mind, I'm like, whatever.
it's just like full circle, right? Vintage is coming back, guys. I don't know if anybody watched the Super Bowl, but there was hella roller skates going
Oh,
on, right? Oh my God.
oh my God,
I
no
was
way.
like,
They
let
did
me
not just do
bust
that.
out my rhinestone suit and my roller skates, and I'm gonna dance and skate around to Usher. My 15-year-old self was like on fire the other
Oh
night.
yeah.
It was amazing. But well, this was fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, I hope this felt good to you. This was really, I think a lot of people are going to feel good about listening to this, just like knowing there's different ways, right?
Yeah, there's definitely multiple
And
paths.
I know they say this in school, right? They say this
Mhm.
in undergrad, even graduate school, when you're a little bit more niched into what you might be doing, but they don't talk about all of the stuff we talked about today of like, you can really do whatever it is that you want, but you have to listen to yourself. You have to listen to what you're capable of. You have to listen to your limits, your, you know, and I think kind of releasing some of the I have to, right? Like if you had listened to what you should have or had to, you'd be in nursing right now.
Oh my God.
Like
yeah.
hating life, right? You know, and if you had listened 10 years ago, you'd still be doing, you know, ED work. If you would listen, right? Like you had to really follow your path despite what other people might have been saying or thinking or pushing you to do, which I think is just a tribute to this field and how we coach other people to, you know, support themselves and to go down their path, and we guide
Yeah,
them.
because at the end of the day, you talk about the social work oath or the social work code of conduct.
Yeah,
If you're not being honest with yourself, you're not going to be able to help the
right,
clients that you serve.
right. I think the most authentic I have ever been has actually like gained more people closer proximity to me that I want in my life and that need me to, right? Like that value added, value received. The closer authentic to me I get, the more I'm having like better people in my life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which is it's all about. So amazing. This was
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you.
I'm excited for this to be aired for our healing professionals, but also just like people that are in my world that like listening to this stuff and gaining some
And they
insight.
might be having their own scratching their head about a few things.
Yes, yes. So where can we find you? Like, I know that you have your own thing, but if somebody wanted to follow you or reach out to you because for whatever reason, MBA, business stuff, or social work stuff, or kind of how your career is more, because we don't talk a lot about the macro stuff. Like, I think in general, I don't find that a lot of social workers are talking about this stuff and how you can use your business stuff in social work, right? So if somebody wanted to connect with you, how could they social media wise?
Prepared for this
I know.
question.
I know. I should have. Is there an email or a
Yeah, so I am on LinkedIn.
perfect?
Yeah,
That's what I was
I
wondering.
go by quick Lisa Wilson. There's like 20,000 there. So I don't know if that's a good sell there. It's Lisa Jones Wilson.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, and
I'll put it in the show notes of how people can reach out, but that's your best platform.
yeah, so you can find me there.
Cool.
You know what? And I'll just give my personal email out. That's fine.
Yeah, I can put that on there too.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want me?
Yeah, you can say it.
Yeah, it's LLCoolJones5
I love it.
at gmail.com, and only older generations get the reference.
I love
But it
it.
is LLCoolJones5 at gmail.com.
Amazing. I won't forget that one.
Yeah.
So I'll put this in the show notes, but you can reach out, you know, just if you want to tap into Lisa's world a little bit more. You know, who knows? There might be somebody that this inspired and is like, hey, I need some guidance. You know, you're teaching and you're always connecting.
I do meet with people for coffee and
yeah, I
process
love it.
stuff.
We've had wine together, we've had coffee together. It's been a good time. So perfect. The last question that I didn't prepare you for. But this is what I ask everybody. If there's one thing, just one little tidbit of information or a word, a sentence, whatever it is you want to share with the world, what would you want that to be? That you want to leave people with today?
Okay, that was not a fair question.
I know, because there's a million thoughts, right?
But
today, whatever sparked your fancy.
I guess the word that comes to mind is authentic.
I love it. Yeah, that's what you've been all about.
Yeah, and for better and for worse, and
yeah, finding your inner drive.
That's one thing that I am, as I look to where I think I want to go in the future. I now know myself more as to what environments are not a good match for me. I know that I need to be in a place that's innovative, fun. I do not do well in places that are conservative. I need places that appreciate sarcasm. And I also am very mission driven.
Yeah.
So those are the types of those are the things that I look for.
Beautiful. Amazing. So authentic, being true to you, figuring out you.
Like I just admit to myself, because you were talking about so many times we do things that you should be doing, and I'm kind of over it.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to embrace because I don't know that I embraced that as much because I was worried about missing out on an opportunity.
Mm,
But now I'm being more selective about opportunities
yeah.
to make sure that they're
Because
a
they
good
will open
match.
for you when you are really true to who you are. Something
Yeah,
will present itself,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
So
Yeah.
awesome.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you
Yeah,
for this.
thank you for having me.
All right, guys. If you, enjoyed this, let us know. If there is anything you want to reach out to Lisa or myself about, please feel free to. And of course, share this with the world or with somebody that you know would benefit from it. So have an amazing day. We love you and go set the world on fire.